Welcome to Health Quest. On today's show, we have a very interesting topic, a topic that has a lot of misinformation, and hopefully we'll be able to clear up a lot of myths and misinformation about this particular subject. The subject we're going to talk about tonight is cholesterol. There isn't a day that goes by that patients don't come in the office and say, what is a normal cholesterol number? You know, we're always concerned about that total cholesterol. That's what most people are concerned when they come in asking about. And in reality, I believe the media and the drug companies have done a very good job of brainwashing most of us to believe that if our cholesterol is above 200, that we really have a problem. Some of the newest research that's coming out is showing that that may not be true. Two examples I'd like to mention tonight. On the island of Crete, which is a small island in the Mediterranean, the average cholesterol for people living there is about 200 total cholesterol. And there hasn't been a heart attack in over 2 or 3 decades. So it kind of makes you think, you know, a little bit over 200, which isn't that high. The French people, the average cholesterol is between 250 and 275. But yet the French have the lowest incidence of coronary heart disease in Western Europe. So it kind of got me thinking about, is this total number, how important really is it? And a number of patients have come into the office who have had heart attacks and strokes, and what their cholesterol was, total number, was 150 or lower. You know, so I started thinking, wait a minute, maybe there's more to this cholesterol than we're being told. And so it's not really the number we have to look at. And what we basically tell a lot of our patients is there's a new test that's coming out, that actually is out now, called the VAP test or LPP test. And this test measures what's called oxidative cholesterol. So before we get into that, we want to learn a little bit more about what cholesterol is, because people will come in sometimes and they'll say, well, what is cholesterol? Well, cholesterol is needed for all of our hormone production. So if we lower cholesterol without knowing the reason why it's high, we're going to affect our hormonal production. That's estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, all the major hormones. And hormones in the human body are messengers to the organs. So we don't want to lower that number and affect hormone production. Cholesterol is also important for cell membrane permeability. Now what that basically means is nutrients go in the cell and waste products go out. So if we can have a problem with the cell membrane, then we're going to inhibit this exchange of waste products and cellular nutrition, which is extremely important that we don't do that, basically. So what does all this mean, and how does the normal lipid panel fit in? Well, let me give you some ideas. The normal lipid panel, we look at the total cholesterol. And again, Western medicine wants us to have that at 200 or less. Actually, there's some recent studies showing they want it even lower than 200. Remember, I said at the beginning of the show that that number really doesn't mean a lot, but we'll come back to that. Then we have the LDLs and HDLs, the low-density lipoproteins, the high-density lipoproteins, so-called HDLs being the good guys, LDLs being the bad guys. Again, recent research is showing that the LDLs in most people are going to be high. So this is the big concern. Oh, my LDLs are skyrocketing and my HDLs are low. What they're showing with the standard lipid panel is that the reason LDLs are high is that form of it's actually a protein, not even a cholesterol, but that will go to the vessel wall to actually help repair damage that could be occurring due to inflammation. So if you have high LDLs, the body knows what to do with it by sending this particular lipoprotein to the vessel wall to actually control an inflammatory process. So it's the body working properly. Normally, when that's elevated, the HDLs will be low. Now, the HDLs, the high-density lipoproteins, their main purpose is to clean up the cholesterol that's there once the repair is done and take the excess cholesterol back to the liver. So it's a process which the human body has been doing for years and years normally. And by the way, the liver is the organ that actually has all of our cholesterol where all the production is done anyway. So if people go on a low cholesterol diet, basically the liver is still going to make cholesterol. So that's a key factor. The triglycerides, the main areas we have to look at are the triglycerides and the ratio. Because if your triglycerides are 80 or less, you're basically going to be at less risk for coronary heart disease. And if your ratio is less than 5, studies are showing there really is no risk. So from the standard lipid panel, those are the basic things we really have to look at. Again, the total number really isn't that important anymore, where a lot of doctors have put emphasis on that in the past. But again, a new test that's just come out is called the LPP or the VAP test. And this test measures increased LDLs that are oxidized. When you have an LDL that's oxidized, that's a different situation than the LDLs we talked about in the standard lipid panel, because the oxidized LDLs actually are small particle cholesterol, which creates the inflammatory process. So if you have an increase in oxidized LDLs, that's a different story. But again, the standard lipid panel will not show that, okay? And there are certain particles that are fractionated in this test that the smaller the LDL particles, the more risk you are. The larger the particles, the less risk. And the other main factor is it's called lipoprotein A. If that is elevated in the blood, that is extremely, extremely important, because that creates what's called an inflammatory process as well as the LDLs we mentioned, and it's prothrombotic, which means it will create blood clots. So if you have an increased LDL oxidized, small particle, and an increased LPA, you are at risk for true heart disease. This is the real cholesterol story. So you can see here, if we don't run this fractionated cholesterol test, we're missing a big part of the picture. So what I tell patients now is ask their family physicians or healthcare providers to run the VAP test also with the standard lipid panel. And I think we're going to find out a lot more risk situations for people in those categories. What tends to happen is we don't want to keep chasing the numbers on the standard lipid panel. What I tell people, we treat the patient, not the number. That's the most important thing. So that's a little bit about cholesterol in a nutshell on some of the tests. Does anybody have any questions that maybe this is something new to them and we can go back and forth?
The VAP test you're talking about,
Yes.
Do you have any idea what it will be? Will it be a blood test, do you think?
Sharon, it's a blood test. It's similar to the lipid panel, but it's measuring the fractionated portion of the cholesterol molecule, not just the total number.
So it does everything.
Exactly, and the oxidation, which are the detrimental things.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Very
Yes,
There are exceptions to all the rules, am I right?
that's correct.
I mean, there's people who smoke all their life, drink all their life, eat anything they want, they have no liver problems.
That's correct.
So how do you know what one you are, you know?
Well,
Instead of worrying about all this stuff.
right, stress can be a big factor which makes people become sick too about, the more you know sometimes the more you can get stressed out about it. But this particular test is a valid test to measure this cholesterol molecule, which everybody's so confused about, that cholesterol is the cause of heart disease. Well, if it's not oxidized in the LDL form, it's not small particle, and LPA little a isn't elevated, you're at no risk. And incidentally, the LP little a, the lipoprotein A fraction, if that is elevated, that is unfortunately a genetic component. And there's no real drug, or there's some supplements that can help with that, but there's no medication that could actually lower the LPA, lipoprotein A, if it's elevated. And this is why I don't think you hear too much about running this test, because unfortunately there really are no good drugs to do it. Like the statin drugs, for instance, that most people are on for cholesterol problems, what they mainly lower is the high LDL portion, the Zocor and the Lipitor. But again, there's side effects with them. I have patients who've come in over the years where they go on a statin drug and all of a sudden they got all this joint pain. Does anybody know the reason why that is?
No, what is?
Okay, the reason for that is because the statin drug actually will block CoQ10 production in the body. And CoQ10 is found in every muscle, every tissue in the human body. And it's kind of ironic because CoQ10 it's most concentrated in the heart muscle. So if we're doing these things to prevent heart disease and depleting CoQ10, what are we really doing? We're creating some pretty bad imbalances.
Say if you were on Lipitor and those drugs, if you took big doses of CoQ10, would it counteract it, or it wouldn't?
That's excellent, because that's what they're recommending now, that if people choose to be on a statin drug, they must supplement with at least 200 to 300 milligrams of CoQ10 per day. And another important fact is if you're over 40 years of age, you've got to be sure that the CoQ10 that you're taking is in the ubiquinol form. There's a ubiquinone form and a ubiquinol form. When you're 20 years and younger, the ubiquinone is able to be converted much more easily. But when you're 40 years of age and older, you need the ubiquinol form, at least 200 to 300
How
milligrams.
do you know which is which? Does it say on the bottle?
Some do, but again, you should
You
check with a
would know.
healthcare provider who knows. This is a big thing because people look at supplements and vitamins and such
You don't really
and
know.
don't really know. And we've discussed some things on previous shows about supplementation, and there's a science behind that. And you just don't go to a health food store and just buy anything, or down to your local supermarket. It's a science behind the supplements too.
How do you feel about people doing some of their own research on the internet, per se?
Well, that can be a double-edged sword sometimes too, Carla, because there's a lot of good information on the internet and there's a lot of misinformation. You know, just like this whole cholesterol thing. You know, we're told what the standard numbers are on the standard lipid profile, but now these new tests are coming out, which, you know, what's the reason we do a cholesterol test? To find out if we're at risk. Well, if we're not running the VAP test, we're not really finding out whether we're at risk. So what are we doing? We're just shooting in the dark, so to speak, you see. So it's kind of a double-edged sword sometimes too. I think it's good that people research things and check things out, but again, you've got to be sure the information is correct, which is a key thing with that.
Can you take one or the other?
What's that?
Can you opt to take something natural instead of taking Lipitor?
Well, that's between you and your doctor. Okay, now if I was, well, you as a patient have the right to choose whatever you want. Okay, but when people come to my office and they're on, let's say, a statin drug, what I try to do is work with them on natural supplements to offset, like giving CoQ10, for instance. For people who have this LP(a) elevated, this genetic component, there's no drug for it, but if you take high doses of buffered vitamin C, and if you take glycine and proline, which are amino acids, there's some signs that will lower this particular component. And that's really big because, again, there's not a drug that does it. So if you're at risk for developing coronary heart disease and there's no drug, guess what? You better find something else, you know, or hope your genetics hold up.
So
You know,
Dr.
to speak.
Stashko, is
Yeah.
there anything on our shelves of our grocery stores that we can eat that's natural, that we could help
That
lower
is an
cholesterol?
excellent question, Terry, because the foods in our grocery stores, unfortunately, the diet is where we need to start. Most cholesterol problems, except for these genetic components, start with the food we eat. So if you walk into a supermarket and you see all this processed foods, you know, all the hidden salt that's in food today, the bad salt, we'll talk about salt sometime.
Certain cereals say that
Oh.
they help lower cholesterol, and it says it right on the box.
Yes.
And
Yeah, unfortunately, that's a good marketing technique, but a lot of the studies are showing that there just isn't enough fortified nutrients. They say there is, but again, in reality, it's way too low. It's way too low. So in order for this cholesterol thing, my views on this, it starts with diet. We really need to be careful. And an interesting point is people will say cholesterol is a fat, okay? But guess what causes the cholesterol to be elevated the most? The total number, which really isn't that important, but if you're into numbers there without doing the VAP test, guess what the cause of most high cholesterol is? Sugar consumption. You bet. If we eat too much processed sugar and high fructose corn syrup, I mean, just Google it on the internet, like getting back to some research, you will be amazed at some of the things you're going to see on what high fructose corn syrup does. Because what happens is the excess sugar in the body, if it can't be broken down by insulin, body's not dumb. Just like with the LDL, HDLs that are normal, not oxidized, it's going to say, convert this to fat. So what happens is the triglycerides in the standard lipid panel are going to be elevated. Okay, so remember I said triglycerides should be 80 or less? So the triglycerides are blood fats, but the source of that is high sugar consumption. And that's a whole other show we can do sometime, talking about the sugar and things like that.
So I would say then it would definitely be good to research your product ingredient list.
That's correct, and that's
as
what
you're
every,
purchasing products in your grocery store.
be more, you know, cognizant of looking at what you're taking, exactly.
sugar
And watch your sugar content. Well, guys, I want to thank you for being on the show tonight, and as we always say here at Health Quest, you write your own prescription for your health.